Well, howdy, Pastor Mark Driscoll here with the weekly newsletter for Mark Driscoll Ministries. If you go to markdriscoll.org, you can sign up for daily devotions. You can sign up for this weekly newsletter. You can also find blogs, Bible teaching. Right now, we're giving away the sermons and research brief and study guide for 1 John, the Father Heart of God. Pretty soon, we'll start rolling out brand new content as well. Jonah, a fishy tale about a faithful God. And before the year end, I hope to have to you a free ebook called Pray Like Jesus, where we look at Jesus' teaching and example regarding our praying. If you send me a question to hello@markdriscoll.org, I'll do my best to try and answer it. And this week, I want to hit the issue of dating, courtship, romantic relationships. You know, for the first time in the nation's history, the majority of adults are in fact single. And so we tend to think of Christianity as primarily, or at least some of us do, for married couples and families, but we worship a single Savior. Much of the books of the New Testament were written by a single guy named Paul, and those who are walking across the United States of America today, the majority of those people are in fact single and not married. So how do they walk with God as they walk through life? And so it is really common when we are born into a culture that the way things are and people behave, particularly in regards to romantic relationships, that we tend to think that what we see is normal, and then we judge everyone and everything else according to that standard. And if it deviates from what we experience as normal, then it's abnormal. But the way that relationships work, especially romantic relationships, and the proliferation of dating, relating, and fornicating while cohabitating, that sort of pattern and precedent is uncommon globally, it's uncommon historically, and it's forbidden biblically. And so what may be normal to us is not normal for God's people historically, globally, or biblically. And so then the question often comes up, should Christians court? Should Christians date? And historically, there have been basically three positions. One is prearranged marriage, where mom and dad, know their child or children, and then start to get to know other families. And as the children grow up, the parents sort of work out a deal that our child is going to marry yours. In the best case scenarios, this is a good family that loves the child and makes a good decision. In a bad situation, it is forcing a relationship in which there is not love or safety, and it is doing so for family position or so for economic benefit. And so it can be good or bad. It just really depends on the parents. And this is more common in cultures where people get married much younger. Oftentimes they're less mobile, so you're not looking at grand urbanization, but more rural existence. The second category is one that we will call courtship. And for me, this is a big debate, but I've got 5 kids. I'm on the brink of having 4 teenagers. My oldest daughter is 19 and a sophomore in college. And so, these are the kind of discussions that we have as a family now that guys are wanting to talk to her and take her out to froyo and see where that relationship might be. Courtship is basically a big category, but for all intents and purposes, I'll summarize it rather simply. It is a romantic relationship between a young man and a young woman that involves the parents. Verses that would support this are like Jeremiah 29:6. It says, "Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease." What he's saying is the pattern in the Bible, and it says it elsewhere, but Jeremiah is just one example, that young men who love the Lord should go find a wife, and that young women who are to marry, that their parents should be involved and the parents should be giving blessing. And we sort of typify this in a Christian marriage where, the young woman is walked down the aisle, and who gives her, to be married? Well, her mother and I, and then the father literally kisses, loves her, I expect has a nervous breakdown is what I'll do, and then hands his lovely daughter over to her husband to enter into a covenant of marriage. And all of that is to symbolize and to show that her parents love her, they care for her, they walk with her, they protect her, they process with her, they think with her, they help her make the second most important decision of her life, the first being who you worship, the second being who you marry. And then the family blesses the union, and that as the relationship primarily transfers from the parents to the spouse, that's the leaving of mother and father, and then the becoming of one flesh and building a family together. And so this can get really legalistic. There can be all kinds of unbiblical rules, and religious people like to take concepts like this and make rules and rules about the rules and subcommittees to oversee the oversight committees that made rules about the rules. But the big heart of it is, like Grace and I love our kids, and we want to help them make a godly decision, and we want to be there to help them make that transition into marriage. It's parental involvement. It doesn't need to be parental control. It can be parental participation, where you're dealing with an adult child and together you're coming to some godly decision through prayer and through wise counsel and through building the relationship and the family getting to know the potential spouse, and all of that being done in the context of loving, safe family support, which helps protect a woman in particular from sexual assault, sexual abuse, which is rampant in our culture, from getting hurt emotionally, physically, spiritually. And the amount of sexual assault and abuse that happens to young women is horrifying. And a pattern like this is just to say, this is our daughter, we love her, and we want good for her future, and we want to protect her from harm, so we want to be involved with her. Category 3 would be non-Christian dating. And Category 2 really works well if you're godly, your parents are godly, you have a nice, healthy relationship, you live in close proximity to one another, you're not spread geographically, but a lot of people, quite frankly, that's not their case. Their parents aren't godly, or they don't live anywhere near each other, or it's an older adult single, somebody's in their 30s and runs a company and has lived on their own for the better part of 15 or 20 years, and their parents are not the ones that are living in the same house with them. And so this brings up dating, and dating has its Christian and its non-Christian versions, and the Apostle Paul in the New Testament says, don't quibble, don't argue over words. So call it what you like. I'm not going to argue over words, but there is a way that our culture practices dating that is not godly. And I'll give you a little bit of a history of dating. So best of my research indicates this. The word dating was introduced into popular vernacular around 1896 in reference to prostitution. That if a man would pay for a woman, or a woman would pay for a man, and they would go out together, they would call that a date. Secondarily, in the early 1900s, calling was more popular, and what would happen is, if a young man wanted to get to know a young woman, he would literally call upon her and go to her home and spend time with her and her family. So this would be a guy coming over for dinner, hanging out with the family, visiting, spending time together with the whole family, so that he was getting to know her and the family was getting to know him. In the early 1900s, women's magazines started to hit the shelf. And so I've got it down here, but one of the first was Ladies' Home Journal, and by around 1900 it had 1 million subscribers. Now you've got this whole industry of ladies, this is what you need to look like, and this is what you need to wear, and this is how you can be attractive to a man, and this is how you can get a man to want to marry you and to please him and take care of him. And this can lead to some really unhealthy things that are told to women, especially young women, and it is not always putting them in the position for the most godliness, but all of a sudden there's a lot of cultural pressure to buy products and behave certain ways and to do certain things. And if you look at the women's magazines on the shelf next to the grocery store checkout, wow, as a dad, I'm like, I cannot believe it just says that, and it's telling my kids that this is a good idea. It's just terrifying. What happens then is, by the 1920s, you've got urbanization. Now there are places that people tend to go other than church and school and work and home. Now you've got restaurants, and you've got dance halls, and you've got bars, and you've got movie theaters, and you've got bowling alleys. Those kind of things come into existence. Well, now people start meeting out in social settings, away from church, away from family, away from home. 1930s, the automobile comes into existence. Well, now you can go wherever you want and do whatever you want, and now you're more anonymous and private, and so now, the dating scene is in full swing. You go pick somebody up and drive them far away from their parents and their family to go do whatever it is you want to do without any supervision or oversight, and that includes guys and gals. What happens then is dating becomes far more popular than calling by around the 1930s. And now it's not men and women getting to know each other in the home of a parent or with relatives or family or friends. It's the two of them having an independent, isolated relationship without any oversight and protection. Well, then by the 1940s, what starts to happen is there's this expectation that, the guy's going to pay for a really nice date. And so he's going to buy a car, that costs money. He's going to go pick the woman up, That costs money to take her out to dinner, take her out to a movie, take her out to a dance hall, or whatever the case may be. And then the guys start to have more of an economic view of the relationship, meaning if I'm going to take you out on a date and I'm going to pay money, then I expect some things in return. And then there's this pressure for young women to do some things that maybe aren't godly, or even things that they wanted to do, but they're being pressured to do those, because if they don't do those, then maybe there won't be a relationship and someone else will do those things. And so all of a sudden it leads to this unhealthy, competitive, economic view of relationships where I paid and now you need to pay me back. And if that doesn't happen, I'm going to move on to someone else. Well, by the 1960s, you've got the feminist movement, you've got the sexual revolution that changes relationships, that changes sexuality, that really is, in some regards, cutting the cord between one generation and the next. And so now children are not as connected to their parents, particularly in those adult years of transition. By the 1960s, now you've got Playboy and you've got pornography, and then this adds an entire new element to sexuality and expectation, what is considered normative, what is considered healthy, what is considered acceptable. By the 1960s as well, you've got the birth control pill, so now people can be sexually active with a reduced threat of pregnancy and or disease. By the 1970s, now pornography is out from under the shelf and it's more public. By the 1970s, around 1973, abortion is now legalized. So now if you are pregnant, there is a legal way to terminate that pregnancy and to take that life. And by 1974, we have no-fault divorce, meaning if you get married and you want out of the marriage, it's a lot easier to do so, both legally and practically. So those of us who were born into this world sometime, let's say 1960s, 70s or later, we think this is all normal, but this is a very fast revolution in relationship and dating and gender and sexuality and the role of the family. This is a very fast-moving change that in the history of the world, it wasn't like this. Globally, you could argue it's still perhaps not like this, and also biblically, it should not be like this. Well, for those who are single, I don't want to quibble over words, but I would simply say for those of you who are younger singles, to be asking yourself, maybe you're in your teen years, what is my view of all this and what is my hope for the future, and should I just fall into the pattern that everyone else that I know is doing, and that is sort of having boyfriends and girlfriends starting in junior high or even younger. For those who are older singles, it's asking, how do I want this to work? What do I want my life to be like? How do I want my relationships to function and flow? For those of us who are married, as I am, it's asking the question, were my dating relationships healthy? And if not, did that set me up for some troubles in my marriage? Grace and I, to be totally frank, we dated in a way that was unbiblical and ungodly. And as a result, when we did commit ourselves to the Lord, she came back to the Lord, I came to know the Lord, and then we got married. We brought some regrets and some baggage and things we had to work through into the relationship because of the way we had dated each other and others previously. And for those of you who are parents or those of you who are grandparents, it's asking, do I have a view of this that I understand, and can I articulate this with my kids, with my grandkids, to help them have a healthy, holy, happy future with someone else? And if not, it's a good thing to really think about these issues rather than just assuming that the way everything is the way that it has to be. I don't want to quibble over words, don't want to be legalistic, don't want to make a bunch of rules where God doesn't make rules, but I would say you've got to just start with the perspective of that relationships, especially romantic relationships or potential romantic relationships, they are, first of all, to glorify God. And so are we conducting ourselves in a way, whatever we call it, that glorifies God with purity, with holiness, with godliness, with self-control? Secondly, the goal of romantic relationships, according to the Bible, should be marriage. Should be marriage. So if you're not intending to marry, why are you spending lots of emotional time together? If you're not looking at someone as a potential spouse, rather, someone that's marryable, why are you investing all of that energy into the relationship if it doesn't have that potential goal in mind? And if you're just sort of hanging out for years and years and years and getting emotionally entangled or physically struggling or crossing lines or making errors, do you have a goal of marriage? And if so, work toward it. And if not, then move on and part ways. And so ultimately, I think the big idea is, number one, the relationship should glorify God and how it comes together and proceeds forward. And number two, if it's a romantic relationship, the goal should be, according to the Bible, marriage, and it should be moving toward marriage. your age, where you live, how close you are to your extended family, whether or not they know and love the Lord. All of those things are variables, of course. I'm out of time. I could say a lot more. I'm sure this will generate perhaps some more conversation, and I welcome and appreciate that. Additionally, maybe we'll pick it up next time in the newsletter. You can find out more at markdriscoll.org, and thanks for tuning in to my weekly newsletter.